All right, so this is how we start. The first thing is I'm going to ask you your full name, and then I'm going to ask you how your people, because you were born in Savannah, right? All right, so how your people, how your ancestors came to the United States, why they came, and how did they end up in the South? How did they end up in Savannah?
Okay.
Okay? Start whenever you're ready.
My name, Walter Jack Lowe. My father was born in Germany. He came over in the late 1890s. The story is told by my aunt Annie Malover. Unfortunately, he never told us anything about himself, as is the usual case. And that's why these oral histories are so important. He got to this country, learned the language, and joined the army here for want of something else to do, I guess. And this is not told to me, but this is the only way I can find out. He was probably stationed at Fort Scriven and met my mother, and they were married in 1920. I, of course, was born in 1921, late 1921. How they got to Savannah, my mother's family were from Poland, a town called Ostrolenki. A story goes with that, but I think right now that's irrelevant. My grandfather and grandmother took my mother and they went to live in Liverpool. Subsequently, my aunt Annie Malover and my uncle scribe Hyman Levy were born in England, which left 3 daughters in Poland, and they weren't having any of that, so they moved to England. The next move, my grandfather, they were amazing people, not them so much as what these Jews who did not know a word of English moved to this country. My grandfather came by himself to try to get established in something and moved to New York. He subsequently brought my grandmother and her children to New York. How they found each other, I will never know, but that was the type of community it was. Excuse me. Now, the next thing you wanted to know was how they got to Savannah, Georgia. One of my aunts, the second oldest, came to Savannah with a friend on a vacation, and she was a union organizer for the Ladies Garment Workers Union. And as an aside, she turned from that to the most conservative person I have ever known in my life. And she brought the rest of the family down. And I was born in Savannah. At age 5, my father, who loved the restaurant business and was a good restaurant man, was offered a position in New York to manage in Manhattan. I think there were 20 some odd cafeterias. So at age 5, we moved to New York. And of course, the Depression hit in '32. The stores closed, the restaurants closed, and the family moved back to Savannah, where my family opened a little grocery store. And I was 11 at the time. I finished grammar school in Savannah, went all through school in Savannah, graduating from Savannah High School in the January class of 1939. It sounds ludicrous. Things were so bad that my dad had to get a job while my mother and I ran the grocery store. Things got a little better, and in '39, I was offered a basketball scholarship at Armstrong. I know it's amusing because as short as I am, but it was a different type of game. And my mentor and one of the finest non-Jews that I've ever known in my life, with more character than anybody I've known in my life, was Chick Shiver. And he gave me my chance at a 2-year education. Armstrong was a junior college at the time. I graduated in '41 and went to work, and my uncle, who was a lawyer, by the way, Hyman Levy, but they had a wholesale dress place, and they needed somebody because Carl Green, Oliver Shalom, went off to the Army. And I went in 1942, so I stayed there for about a year. I stayed in the Army for 4 years. I came back. I was stationed in Kodiak, Alaska, gateway to the Aleutian Islands. Did all my training in Virginia, basic training in the heat of the South. I was sent to this freezing temperature. I was told that I was going to officer school in June of 1944. And I thought they were pulling my leg, but it was true. I was lucky enough to catch a bush pilot. I was waiting in a little hut, and they said, nobody ever lands here. Just so happened the next day, he put down I got on a plane and flew to Anchorage with him, but that was another experience. It's the first time I'd ever flown and my heart was in my mouth. Came back to the States, went to officer school. Upon graduation, I was assigned to the Boston port, and they sent me to Taunton, Massachusetts, which was a port of embarkation and debarkation afterwards. I called Lillian, who I'd been going with for many years, and asked her to marry me. I got a 5-day leave, came back to Savannah, and got married in March of 1945, which makes me married 69 years and 5 months. If today is the 11th, is it the 11th?
12.
12. 69 years, 5 months, and 1 day. And we had a very short honeymoon, and I went back to Camp Miles Standish in Taunton, Massachusetts. Now I guess you want to know more about my Jewish experiences.
Yes, in fact.
Before I went in the Army, the old alliance, and I've heard you say this, and it's so trite, was that on Barnard and Charlton Street, where it was a second home to every young Jewish boy and girl. And my mentor there was Jerome Eisenberg, who was the head of the math department at Savannah High School, but was also part-time athletic director at the JEA, and Rabbi Leibovitz. As I recall, there was a split in the B.B. Jacob. I know it's amusing to you. And they brought this rabbi down who later on stayed as executive director of the JEA, one of the finest men I've ever known. My family belonged to the Agudas Achim, started by my grandfather, who was a Talmud Chacham in this part of the country. They had the ridiculous notion that shul was for praying and for learning and not for politics. And they broke away from the Agudas Achim and hand-built a shul, catty corner from the B.B. Jacob. Of course, there was no way near as ostentatious. It was a wooden building. And I learned with my grandfather. Unfortunately, I didn't stay with it, as most stupid young men after my bar mitzvah. Sports happened to be the most important thing in my life. And there is where I was bar mitzvah, at the Agudas Achim. It was a wooden structure. I can see it now. Very, very orthodox. My grandfather, I can see him now. He was my hero and role model. He stayed in shul all day Shabbos, and I've never known him to be a drinker, but this is this is amusing to me. He used to sit with a glass of scotch while he was learning, and he'd have a challah, and he'd dip the challah in the glass and eat it. And he had a group of men around him learning with him. And I'm sure that since this will be edited, I'll have to skip some. One of my mother's sisters was married to a man who was arbitering, and the rest of the family kind of looked down on him because he was like a communist, but he wasn't. He was the sweetest man, Abe Sadler. And again, as an aside, they ran a little grocery store on 39th and Burroughs, and I was shocked when I asked his daughter, Bernice, who is now 97, how old Uncle Abe was when he died, and she said 49. I could not believe it. All the men in their family, they had a son. My Aunt Eva Sadler had a son that died when he was 17. Her husband died at 49, and Barney died when he was 68. These are the Sadlers. The women lived into their late 90s. And Bernice, of course, Elman, is still living. We used to have the largest AZA chapter in the United States. It's hard to believe. And National made us break it up into 2 chapters. The David Finn, I forgot the other one, what they call them. And that's where our social life was. My wife, I'm proud to say, was sweetheart 2 times in a row. And of course, that's where you met your friends. We met at the Alliance on Charlton and Barnard every Sunday. And Julius Shube used to have all the records that we played, and we danced and we schmoozed, and I don't know what else you want, but that's about it.
This is fascinating. Normally I'm asking some questions and I really didn't need to. I do want to just ask, do you need to some things never change and some things are of a surprise to me. So I'm going to try and unpack a little bit and go all the way back to your parents, grandparents' generation. What is so amazing about the stories you tell is that the people, for whatever hardship they were braving, to pick up and leave to come to countries where they didn't know the language, they didn't know the people, they didn't know the structure, maybe they were afraid of anti-Semitism, but something must have been so terrible where they were to force them to leave. And so throughout these generations, I get a sense that, of course, they were leaving for a better life, and yet they came and they were active, whether they were someone on the socialist, communist scale, working for union and organizing, or to the other extreme, somebody who was learned and studied and, just tried to follow the rules to be accepted. It seems like they were driven to create a better life, not only for themselves, but for their children. Could you think back to the first time you really understood that you were Jewish and that that was different from the majority of people that lived around you? And
See, I'm not a good example because when we moved to New York, it's hard for me to believe that. I hope you don't have this on there. My mother, being her father's daughter, and I've never gone to cheder in my life. She hired a Malamed, and he learned with me. And I was surprised at only last week I found a Yiddish magazine that I could still read some of the Yiddish in it. He came twice a week. I remember Mama giving him 50 cents or whatever. I read the Yiddish newspaper. I always knew I didn't have to be told that I was different. I didn't have to be told that I was Jewish. I didn't have to be told that there might be some unpleasantness. Oddly enough, until after the war, I personally and my friends found very little anti-Semitism in Savannah. The only reason that I think is that it's a seaport town, and not in the way that New Yorkers think of themselves, but we're a little more cosmopolitan. But I always knew I was Jewish. I never tried to hide the fact that I was Jewish. My name is not Jewish. My father took out the wrong E. If I took out the right E, we'd have been Lowe. I'd have been a rich man. But his name was Lowe. Loewe, and the W is pronounced as a V. And he spelled it Lowe. An amusing thing at Ellis Island, my grandfather's name, their Polish names were Zdrojewo. At Ellis Island, my grandfather was named Levy, and his brother was named Reuben. His brother never left New York, davened in the shtibel, lived on a 5th floor walker. The biggest mistake I ever made was not taking Lillian with me. I thought that she would not enjoy it. I had a car. I drove to Williamsburg and walked up those 5 flights of steps. He was very frum. He walked down the steps and brought me to his shtibel where he davened. It was a store. I had never been in a shtibel before, to my knowledge. Until Lillian had a bad problem with her neck. If you ask your husband, C1, C2, we went to Mayo 5 times. They would not operate. My grandson Daniel has a brother-in-law who worked with this South African Jewish, very frum doctor who teaches at NYU. He's a neurosurgeon and an orthopedic surgeon. He asked to be sent the pictures. So Sandy Behrens very kindly got all the X-rays, MRIs, and CAT scans and sent them out. And he said he really needed some newer. We went to New York. We were supposed to go there and he was going to take pictures. We were to come back in a few weeks. He says, I'm going to see if I can try to get you in the hospital now. I can do this. I was scared to death. Lillian was in such agony. She didn't care. At Mayo, they said, there's so many nerves back on the spine. Had they made one mistake, she would be paralyzed from the neck down. My sons took turns coming up there. My middle son, David, was there. We waited and waited and waited. And the first person that came down took off his mask. And he's a Korean. And he said, he the best. And the doctor came down and said, it was a successful surgery, but she's going to have problem with her lumbar and her C5 and 6 or whatever, I don't remember. But she'll just have to live with it and take medication. He will be no use operating again. The main thing is over, for which I am forever grateful. And his name was Moskovich. He teaches at NYU. This is about 12, 14 years ago. He might be retired now. So I am off the beaten track. Her parents were from Brest-Litovsk. I think they married when they got to this country. They knew each other. Learned the language and raised a beautiful family, 3 daughters.
Let me ask you, I'm going to stop for just a second because I need, so many people I talk to who grew up in Savannah tell me that there was a very big difference between Savannah Jews and German and Polish Jews that came in through immigration, and that Yiddish was not the lay of the land here in Savannah, and that the Jews that spoke Yiddish or that were more European in their customs did not necessarily get along with the Jews who were already established and more Southern and perhaps American in their customs. Do you have any memories of such a thing? And do you have any memories that you could share of maybe a story that illustrates what the difference between the different Jewish communities here in Savannah was?
You know, I hate to use the word guilty. First of all, I want to tell you something. I belong to the Agudas Achim. Later, when it became Orthodox, I moved there. I have many good friends at the Mikveh Israel. Certainly, I'm not going to leave the Alliance. I like to think of myself as a community person. I want every Jewish organization, to succeed. Every one of them. I think there is a well-known fact, and it is a fact, and I'm as German as anybody, that, and I'm not blaming the temple people, but it could be that the Fruma Yidden could have been a little paranoid and thought they were being looked down upon, and it could have been the case in some cases. It is not, it is an individual thing. It is an individual thing. Certain people think they're better than others, and not in the Jewish community, in every facet of somebody's life. I know people who think a poor person has a character flaw. It burns me up. It burns me up. But you and I both know that that's the truth. We know that's the truth. It hurts me. It really hurts me. I am going to have to change over from Jews to blacks. I was raised in a mixed neighborhood. Some of these people who professed to be incensed about speaking ill of a black person, I'll ask them, do they know anybody black? Blue collar or lower class black, other than maybe a school teacher or a banker or somebody. They don't know them. I have particularly one who I would trust my children and have. He is the, without a doubt, finest, guileless person I have ever known. We speak to each other at least once a week, especially during baseball season. He's a real baseball fan. And if you've ever met a person who is a gentleman, both inside and outside, Willie Smith Jr. is that person. We all have our prejudices. We all. Somebody who thinks someone's an anti-Semite, you'll talk about an evangelical Christian. They'll look down on them. They're dumb, they're stupid, they're whatever. But I can't think of any person that God put on earth that the Iron Horror hasn't put some bigotry in.
You talked about your family having a store. Who was the clientele? Was it a Jewish clientele? Was it a black community business?
And blacks and whites. That's why we lived in a mixed community. The small store. It was on 41st and Burroughs. And you probably never heard of Burroughs Street. You've heard of MLK. Used to be West Broad. 1 block west of West Broad was Burroughs Street. I'll tell you the kind of person my mother was. A Chinese person opened up on 40th, 1 block away and 1 block south. And my mother used to go there and help him. Because she knew what it was.
What's so fascinating to me is I've talked to a lot of people about anti-Semitism. People who didn't even realize that there was any difficulty, but I would say something like, were you allowed to join the school clubs? Were you allowed to do, oh no, we joined the JEA, we joined the sports clubs at the JEA. And then if I ask a little further, they said, well, we weren't allowed to. The same thing applies to your discussion of blacks, that it seems that from minority to minority, maybe because there's the same sense of understanding of your position in society, that maybe there was not as big a difference. And the story that you're just telling me now about the Asian gentleman opening up a store and your mother offering support, is there something about being Jewish that makes us this giving to other people?
I'll answer that question now. Yes. In most cases, we have, I hope this is not on.
It is.
Well, I won't mention it then. I can't. I'll go back just to say that we all have our prejudices. I have people, I know it's spread all around town that I'm conservative. And when they accuse me of being conservative, I said, I'm not conservative, I'm sensible. I try to be. I hope I know right from wrong. I was taught right from wrong.
How does Judaism teach you, or how did it teach you, a tradition, an ethical work ethic, a relationship, so that you could navigate relationships with other people?
Let's get back to the other thing about clan. Why blacks stick together, Jews stick together. I don't think that has anything to do, other than some of the scum of the earth everywhere, that has anything to do with prejudice. You just feel more comfortable with people of your own race and religion. I've been reading lately about schools that have been desegregated a long time, but you'll see clusters of blacks together, you'll see clusters of whites together. It can't all be prejudice. It's a comfort zone that they feel.
I think that's probably the best answer to that people gravitate to what they know.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask you 10 tough question that I wrestle with, and that is the JEA. The JEA was founded as a Jewish Education Alliance. The JEA, depending on who you talk to, every Jewish child went. Some Jewish children tell me, some people growing up in the old building tell me they weren't welcomed in the new building because of where they went to synagogue, or some people tell me that they lived in these, and that they always talk about the numbers of kids. I look around and I know that the Jewish community goes through periods where their different groups regroup. Education is very important. Remaining Jewish, keeping our traditions are important. What has happened so that your grandchildren don't necessarily immediately think they have to come back and live in Savannah? My children have not chosen to move back to Savannah. What is it that we're missing?
Good question. Number one, when we used to have to play a basketball game in Charleston, I'll get back to the point. It used to take a month for who can get a car, where are we gonna stay. Now I look around, I got a granddaughter, she's in South America. I got another one that was in Wyoming. I think, to answer your question, we educate our children. They go to different places and they find the financial opportunities better there. I have 0 grandchildren. I have 7 living in Savannah. Not one. Not one. Fortunately, I have a son and his wife that live here. Other than that, there was a choice. There was a choice at the beginning. But they decided to move to Savannah, raise their 3 children here. One now is in Teaneck, New Jersey. He's a doctor. One is in England, married in England. And one is a pediatric dentist in Baltimore. Now that's one family. The other 2, same thing. Their children don't live with them. I have 7 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren. Thank God the great-grandchildren have to live at home, because the oldest is like 7. But the grandchildren are all gone.
So let me ask you something. One of the things that seems to be a thread through most of the interviews is the fact that we have been so successful as American Jews that we are finding ways to break down all kinds of barriers. People don't necessarily join the JEA as the Jewish option because they can go to the YMCA. Has our success damaged our ability to keep ourselves Jewish?
You answered your own question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I would find it very hard to join the YMCA. No prejudice, they're Christian. It says YMCA. it's okay. They want to go there for exercise rather than come here. They're closer, it's cheaper, whatever. I'm not critical of that. Personally, I couldn't do it. Personally, I could not do it.
What is the essence of Judaism? The nugget, the wisdom that you hope you have given as your legacy to your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren?
The only thing that I could give my wife is responsible. I don't want this on camera because modesty is not my strong point, but it is my wife and my children, to a point where I could choke them. Are we all for camera?
Yes.
My wife, I'll use the excuse that she worked too. She worked. But she made sure whatever job she had, she was home when they came home. They went to the library every single week. 2 of my 3 sons, Alan didn't. Alan was a little more mature and he knew he wasn't ready to go off to school. So he went to Armstrong for 2 years, went to Georgia for 1 quarter, could not stand it because he couldn't study, finished up at George Washington. My other 2, one of them graduated John Brandeis Summa. My other one went to Chapel Hill, graduated Summa, and both had Phi Beta Kappas in their junior years. If I were to mention that on camera, they were to see that, they wouldn't speak to me again.
Well,
They
let me
don't
change the
t-
question so that you can answer it on camera. How, in talking in generalities, what is it about Jewish? You mentioned you were on the basketball team and that you were short. What was it as a Jew being on a secular team? What did you have to do to be? Did you try and be better than everyone else? Were you driven to succeed? Did your parents push you to be educated, to be the best you could be? And is that a Jewish trait?
That is a Jewish trait.
All right, so this will be on camera. So tell me a little bit about that. What is it that drives Jewish
But
parents to try and push their
play
children?
With that team, particularly with our coach, we were all alike. We had one goal. That was to try as hard as we can or harder, and to try, if possible, to win. My best friend on that team was an Italian from Macon, Georgia, Joe Giannoni. His father was a barber. It was hard for us to compete because we had only local boys. We had no dormitory at the time. Excuse me.
While you're first of all, were you in A.J. Cohen's class at Armstrong? A.J. Cohen? Were you in his class at Armstrong?
He was a year older than a grade.
So you weren't in the first graduating class.
No.
You were in
It started in 35. I went in 39.
In 39, okay. So now I've heard from other people, like Bucky Bloom, that he was discriminated against in terms of college, that he wasn't allowed to go to dental school at Emory because they had reached a quota of Jews.
In those days, that
was there a quota
true.
at Armstrong?
No.
No, okay.
They couldn't afford to that. our building, do you know where Armstrong was?
It was it downtown? Was it,
It's the Lee
the Lady Bowen
Lawrence.
lost, right, right.
Then they were able to purchase a building next to it for the accounting department. We had the most beautiful campus in the world. You know what it was? Forsyth Park. It was across the street. Absolutely not. I could tell you a story again off camera. Jerry Eisenberg, who was the brains of Savannah High School's basketball team too. The coach was John Varnado, who became principal. He was a Fabissina yokel. Chick Shiver and George Van Giesen. There were 2 Jews, 3 Gentiles in the car. Chick was driving, and Varnado started talking about the Jews. At that time, Chick had gone from Armstrong, was coach of Savannah High School's basketball team. And why he left Armstrong is another story. I'll give it to you right quick. He had drawn a science building, a dormitory, and all the administrators thought it was a great building, so they made a science building out of it. He couldn't bring in outside talent, so we couldn't compete in football. They gave up football. Anyhow, 3 Gentiles, 2 Jews in the car. And Varnado starts spouting off. And remember, Chick Shiver, who was my coach at Armstrong, was now coaching at Armstrong. They were in the middle of nowhere. Pulled the car off the road. He was a big man, but gentle. He picked Varnado up, took him out of the car. He says, I'm going to give you 2 choices. Now, this comes from my uncle. I was not there. You're going to stay on this road until some stupid person picks you up, or you're going to never, in my presence, say anything about Jews, anything anti-Semitic in your life. Now, I can't be with you all the time, but when you're with me, that's going to be a promise.
Are you good for about another 8 minutes? Because I do want to ask you
Sure.
something. And I'm sorry, this is really, you're fascinating to
Picked
talk
him
to.
up and put him back in the car and closed the door and said, I want to keep your mouth shut the rest of the way.
So let me ask you something that can be on camera, and that is, you talked briefly about your service in World War II, and actually you mentioned being in Alaska and then coming back to the States. So I'm assuming, of course, Alaska wasn't a state until
No.
at the time that you were there. It was a territory, and
No, I was on an island off of
the illusion.
Alaska.
Oh, okay, all right, but they were in a state, and you
Alaska
also.
would have been heaven already.
So you would have also seen a couple of things. Number one is post-war understanding or gaining an understanding of what the Nazis actually had done to German Jews, Polish Jews, both of which were your ancestry. The establishment of the State of Israel and the anti-Semitism that went around, Israel yes, Israel no, even between Jews, arguing whether or not it was a good thing to be so political all of a sudden, or was it a bad thing for Jews because people would try and take advantage of the fact that we wanted our own state. Do you have any thoughts about that period of time and, what you knew and how you reacted, and especially in light of your family's activism and the leadership roles that they had in so many things, your parents and grandparents. Did you actively participate in any way in bringing Jews over, working towards better understanding, the Joint Distribution Committee, or any of these ways in which Jews helped Jews or got the word out that Jews were not so terrible and we needed to support Israel?
Well, unfortunately, the most work that I did with Jews were the Russian Jews. And my job in those days was to get them jobs. And very modestly, I would say I had 100% success rate. I got every single one a job.
Why was getting a job so important to teaching Russian Jews about American life or Jewish life?
Because they had a need to feel independent. Maybe it's something innate, even though they were from Russia and they could not think for themselves and they had to do, but the ones that I tried to get jobs for were very anxious to look for something. I'll give you one example. I had 2 Russian mechanics. They were brilliant. First time I ever saw a car drive by itself. This guy took an ordinary car and set up a remote control. So I went by the Oldsmobile dealer and I asked him about a job for 2 mechanics. And at first, they give you, I don't really need anybody. And I said, but they are extraordinary. He says, well, all my mechanics, it's a rule here, have to have their own tools. And they're very expensive. So I said, I am sure that an exception could be made in this case until they can make enough money to buy their own tools. And they are clever enough to actually build what they need. The manager could not believe it. He gave them the job. And they stayed there for several years until they decided to move. I think they went to North Carolina to open their own shop. But yes, there is something. Just like they say, it's hard for me to compute that a Kohen today has the same DNA as Aaron the Kohen. The Jews have something in them. Not everybody, there are exceptions to every rule. I know Jews who wouldn't work if you handed it to them. But as a rule, generally speaking, during the height of the Depression, I did not know one Jew that was on the dole. Not one. And of course, we didn't have the safety nets they have now. They didn't have unemployment insurance. They didn't have at that time not even what you paid into Medicare or Social Security. But if you had a little family that had a piece of bread, they'd share it with you. And that's how the Jews survived.
Is there anything we didn't talk about or that I didn't ask you about a story you would love to tell?
I'm sure there's a lot. Look, I'm almost 93 years old. I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about.
Is there something special about being a Savannah Jew, a Southern Jew, that is different for you than it was for your relatives that didn't move to the South?
I can't say about any place else because I've heard of Southern towns that are really tough for Jews to succeed, and yet I've heard of Southern towns where they have done very well. I'm smiling because there is a joke that I'll end this up with. And I'm sure you'll edit it. There was this poor Yidel, just could not make a success of anything. And some friends got together and said, we'll give you some money. You go to this southern town, you'll open up a clothing store. A lot of these towns, they do pretty well. He says, I can't promise I'll pay it back. Says, that's all right, as long as you try. He goes to this town, opens up a nice store. No business. He doesn't know what to do. He befriends a Gentile who feels sorry for him and said, Max, I hate to tell you this, but our town, you have a few people who are good souls, but our town will not buy from a Jew. He says, oh my God, what am I going to do? He says, you'll have to close up or become a Christian. He says, I can't close up. I owe all this money. So he says, you'll become a Christian. He says, what do I have to do? You heard the joke? He says, you go to church for a month, then the pastor will swear you in, and you'll make a little speech. So he goes to church the first Sunday. That business picks up like crazy. Comes the time for him to be sworn in. He's sworn in. And the pastor says, Max, the congregation would like to hear a speech from you. Are you prepared? He says, oh yeah. So he gets up to the microphone, and here's the way he starts. Fella Goyim, and that's the joke.
Thank you.
That's all.